There's a folk tale preserved by the brothers Grimm called The Ungrateful Son. And it goes like this. Once a man and his wife were sitting outside the front door with a roast chicken before them. And they were going to eat it between them. And then the man saw his old father coming along. It was probably Father's Day. That was a joke. The old father was coming along, and the son quickly took the chicken and hid it, for he begrudged him any of it. And the old man came, had a drink, and went away. Not a very good Father's Day. Now the son was about to put the roast chicken back on the table, but when he reached for it, it had turned into a big toad. And it jumped in on his face, and it stayed there, and it wouldn't go away. And if anybody tried to take it away, it would give them a poisonous look, as if it were about to jump on their faces. So it was so terrifying, nobody dared to touch it. And the ungrateful son had to feed the toad every day. Otherwise, it would eat part of his face. Yeah. So, share your chicken with your dad on Father's Day. And thus he went ceaselessly, hither and yon about the world. Thus ends the story. Yeah. Now, we might think this a peculiar tale, a toad on the face, how strange. But the situation is oddly similar to another saying that we use all the time, to have a monkey on your back. Right? And we've lost the origin of that saying, the story behind it. But we understand the idea conveyed, right? There is something that weighs on you, perhaps an uncharitable action you've done or a thought that you hold that makes you anxious or angry, and as a result, unattractive to those around you who might want to help. I don't need anybody's monkey or toad jumping on me. The story suggests relationship with people can be infectious. And I believe this is true both for pessimism and optimism. When we think over the story of the man, the father, the chicken, and the toad, we might be tempted to analyze the relationship, add in a little bit of backstory to try to explain, right? Maybe he was a selfish father, or maybe there was a famine. But the story's not literal. It's not meant to be anything other than the idea that you grow an ugly animal on your face when you don't share with those closest to you. And until you mend your ways, you have to feed that animal forever. The cultural critic Lewis Hyde speaks of a common theme that he finds in folklore, teaching us that when a gift is given without intention, a blessing occurs. And when it's held back, there is a curse. Time and again, he points to stories of people that choose more for themselves, thinking that that was the wisest choice, only to see it all taken away from them, and worse. As children, we were taught the cautionary tale of King Midas, right? Such a great power that he had to turn whatever he touched into gold. Except when he reached for an apple, and all of his food turned to gold. And then he tried to console his daughter, and she turned to a statue of gold. And weeping, he realized not only that he had killed his daughter, but that he had sealed himself off from the world. For Hyde, the gift of artistry, of relationship, of material, of anything must be kept in motion. There's nothing that is really ours. And a healthy life pays homage to this by receiving and offering gifts in return. When collecting or hoarding becomes part of our lives, the gift dies and our life becomes hardened. There are echoes of Buddhism that I hear in this theory, according to the Buddha, right? We suffer when we are attached to things that we think are real because we think we're right or because we think we can own them, when in fact, everything is impermanent. Nothing can truly be yours. Not money, not a car, not a relationship, not even your own body can you keep on holding on to. Everything, according to Buddhism, is impermanent. But this also means that everything is interdependent, where nothing exists on its own, but rather exists within a nexus of relationships. And Lewis Hyde speaks of the gift as a profound interrelatedness that produces healthy situations when it's allowed to flow like a river, and pestilence when forced to pool and stagnate. And a profound interrelatedness that produces healthy situations when it is allowed to flow like a river, and pestilence when forced to pool and stagnate. And in this, there is, an underlying critique of Western society, a culture based on accumulation, on the idea of a penny saved is a penny earned, on museums, on the measuring of our meaning by our acquisitions. Hyde uses the story of the first European settlers in North America who developed the term Indian giver because they were incensed by societal requirements of gift giving in the native cultures they encountered. He uses the example of the peace pipe, which in native cultures was smoked and shared and given as a gift, not one that you owned, but rather one that made it through the community as you then smoked and shared and gave it as a gift. It was an emblem of shared relationship. And the Europeans got into trouble because they took the pipe and they put it on a mantle. They put it on display, removing it from circulation, keeping the gift for themselves, keeping the gift pooled and away from culture and society. And eventually, the native people came knocking because they were like, that thing has to keep moving around. It's critical for the health of the community. And as a result, the Europeans started saying Indian giver, right, as someone who comes to ask for the thing back. But they just misunderstood what was happening. Lewis Hyde is careful in saying that it's not the object itself that's the gift, but rather the movement that is the gift, the intention that is the gift. An object has certain qualities when it is kept moving and certain qualities when it is not moving. But the gift is always there, waiting to be tapped, waiting to be channeled, waiting to be released. It is always hopeful. I'm debating whether I read this now. I'll read it. This sermon isn't about the American economy, but this was something that I found really painful about the last few years that we've been through, right? We're talking about the financial situation of this nation and the pandemic. And I remember just feeling, I heard this one day. It was just overwhelming to me as thousands of people were out of work. The pandemic and the dynamic that was happening was creating a billionaire every 19 hours. And, tax cuts, when we talk about tax cuts, what I hear is the greed of the son and his chicken, and tax cuts are not intended to keep money in motion, but rather to pool it, to let it stagnate in bank accounts of the few. And the only reason I bring this up, I sort of debated whether I bring this up. The only reason I bring this up is it is actually, that's not the problem in itself. I mean, yes, it's a problem. But it's actually a symptom, right, of a spiritual malady. A spiritual malady in our culture that insists on the ownership of the gift that is not really ours, but which needs to move through us creatively, freely, without demands or expectations. Right? You don't end up in a dynamic where a billionaire is created every 19 hours just by chance. It's designed to be that way. And it's a spiritual malady. All is not entirely gloomy, however, right? The man with the toad on his face might find that by entering into a giving relationship, the toad no longer wanted to be there. Right? The poisoned look would no longer suit the situation because restitution had been made. But this is a spiritual path. The path to the cessation of suffering is not walked by the light of reason alone, which I know probably concerns a great many Unitarian Universalists. The path to the cessation of suffering is not walked by the light of reason alone. Reason is a very individualist concept. My reasoned approach may not be the same as your reasoned approach. But let me tell you, my reasoned approach is backed up by some of the best self-righteous thinking. And your best reasoned approach is backed up by some of the best self-righteous thinking. And if we don't want to live with scowling, flesh-eating toads on our faces, humility would do us all well. Starting with me. I really mean that. We are facing a call for a spiritual awakening in this world and in this nation. And as members of this faith, it is up to us to ask if we are ready. Are we ready? Perhaps we are. Perhaps we are not. Over the course of my ministry, 19 years, I've come to believe that Unitarian Universalism is something that only occurs when we are in community. That is, we don't have a book that binds us or a particular eschatology explaining how the future of humanity will work out. We come together to find meaning. There is an intangible electricity that occurs when we gather. It does not occur when we are alone. Right? The potentially upsetting idea that accompanies this assertion is that we cannot be Unitarian Universalists when we are not engaged in community. Right? In fact, on the minister level, we insist upon this. Reverend Eleanor, sitting here in second row, we say that our community ministers must be connected to a congregation. They cannot just be UU ministers floating in the world. Theologically, we reject that idea, right? They have to have a connection to a congregation. So we can be open-minded, we can be advocates for justice, we can be lovers of humanity and nature, we can hold principles that are aligned with the Unitarian Universalist movement, but unless there is an intention made to be part of a community, I actually don't think we are Unitarian Universalists. I know, right? It's not something you can claim and hold. It is something that is lived and made new all of the time. And there are people who say otherwise. They have reasoned themselves very well. And some of you are probably like, but wait a second, what about my kids? Right? I suspect parents who raise children in our congregations who no longer attend still want to believe that their children are Unitarian Universalists. But my experience in speaking with people who, like me, were brought up in the church, typically we frame it as, well, I was raised Unitarian Universalist. And we're very proud of that. We're thankful for that. But it's usually done in that phrasing. I was raised Unitarian Universalist. As a people, UUs tend to distrust external authority. We don't believe something is true simply because a church tells us it's true or a book tells it so. We don't accept claims simply because they are part of a long tradition. We are doubters in the best possible way, truly. I actually think that's a beautiful thing. We are doubters. What does this mean? We are questioners. We are seekers. Some of this, I think, is inherent. Just it appeals to a particular type of person. There are different types of people in the world, and some like having answers, and some like seeking. But it's also easy to fall into a trap of saying that we are seeking when, in fact, we've stopped seeking. Unitarian Universalist theologian Sharon Welch calls us to embrace an ethic of risk. And by this she means spiritual risk. I think our historical New England origins have shaped our culture. We appeal to seekers, but when seekers find our congregations, they are impacted and shaped by the culture of our communities, and our culture often is one of self-reliance. Our most remembered theological forefather, Ralph Waldo Emerson, even titled one of his essays this, Self-Reliance. And it opens with a quote in Latin that translates as, "Do not seek outside yourself." And there's wisdom. There is wisdom in this. If you rely solely on external sources for authority, for truth, you are bound to live their lives instead of your own. I do believe that you must listen to, and we've talked about this earlier in the year, you must listen to the gift that is coming through you. But reliance on the self, on individualism, is also a pitfall. Because there is nothing that supports your belief that you are right, nothing that supports your belief that you are right as much as my own thinking. I'll say that. There is nothing that supports my belief that I am right as much as my own thinking, especially when there is justice at stake, especially when I'm riding my bike. I've never been as self-righteous as when I'm riding my bicycle. Everybody's wrong. Pedestrians are wrong, cars are wrong, other bikes. We complain about those people who drive Hummers for not caring about the interconnected world. But is not the shadow side of our faith this exact theological justification? Is it not that which makes it possible? What is mine is mine. What's yours is yours. Here I get to build my own theology. Theologian Paul Razor points out that we constantly say we want stronger communities, but seem afraid to let go of the individual orientation that stands in the way of a stronger community. A shared belief in autonomous individualism, he says, is a poor foundation on which to build a deeper sense of community. He cited a survey of more than 10,000 UUs who, when asked, what role has your congregation played most important in your life? What's the most important role your congregation has played in your life? And the largest response by far was, it supports my views and upholds my values. My views, my values. Exposed is the subliminal belief that we come to be affirmed rather than to grow and change. Where do we go to become more compassionate people? Where do we go to become more loving people? Where? There's a theological belief that I am who I already want to be, and I want this place to reflect that. We pool together as much as the evangelicals of old who removed themselves from society because they found it distasteful. And we actively engage in the world, but in a secular way. Rarely do we enter the world saying, I am here because my faith tells me to be here. Love is the teaching. Love is the teaching. But sometimes it feels awkward and gauche. But really what's happened is that our faith is pooled, it's become stagnant, and our demands on certification in the learned ministry, while they have their upsides, I'm beginning to believe have created a dissonance that occurs between our rational minds and our emotional states. There's a great barrier of what is between what's yours and what's mine. And some time ago, I got tired of preaching the easiest UU sermon ever to preach, which is, those Republicans are bad. It's the easiest one to preach in the world, and it always gets applause. And some UU ministers have made a career out of it. But I honestly am super tired of it. For me, I want to be part of a place that helps me become a better person, that invites me into a space of humility, that invites me into a space of being held. They have this phrase, they used to say it a lot, care-fronted instead of confronted. Care-fronted. There's a lot of possible endings to this world. For us as Unitarian Universalists, the meaning of our lives is not given, it's not prescribed, it's not determined, there's no fate. It's constructed through our lived actions. Revelation is continuous, it is not foretold. The direction, however, of our path can be discerned. It can be discerned. We can see how one action leads to another. The inertia of one set of decisions will lead to a perceivable outcome. So what outcome do we want in the world? In this church? In our families? A stronger community with a deeper sense of relationship means that the gift must be valued, must be kept moving, that individualism, ownership of my spiritual path must be released, or else I end up walking around with a toad on my face, and none of you want to help me because it looks like it might jump onto your face. But I really need help. This is not easy. Churches, congregations, temples are not really known to be places where the pool is calm. We are potatoes that bounce against one another, but we want to make sure that we don't bounce out of the pot. Right? We want to be able to be a place where trust and vulnerability can be put before the whole community. Individualism has this protective quality to it. It pools the gifts and the creativity of the universe. And a deeper spiritual life means that we must risk and trust that the group will respond to our fears and hopes. And we must trust ourselves. There is a well-worn adage, a ship is safe in the harbor, but that is not what ships are for. You are never going to encounter the sense of communion in the harbor. That is just a bunch of sailors talking all sorts of stories about mythical creatures that live at the edge of the world, or so they've heard. And I know that change is hard. I know it's painful and irritating and sometimes really just distasteful at times. And I know that sometimes people just want to hear sermons about how bad Republicans are. But I'm not that guy. And I don't want to be that guy. Frankly, I find it boring. Not because I'm an apologist for all of the white nationalist nonsense that's happening out there, because I'm not. But I want my life as a minister to be more than an echo chamber of my views and my values. I don't want to live that way. I want to see what it's like to radically welcome what is different. I want to sail out into the ocean and see what kind of community we can belong to. One where we find value not in hoarding ourselves, but in giving ourselves. Generosity sounds so easy. God, it just flows out of the mouth, so easy. Until the moment where I'm actually tested. And I'm like, Mark, that's not what I want to do. Mark's like, well, that's what I want to do. And I have to sit there and be like, okay. Usually it doesn't come that easily, right? True generosity means giving something of value, not trinkets that are easily discarded. If a church has to be about what is already here, then you are not ready for the world that awaits. You're not ready for the world that needs your generous spirit. And it's okay to say that this is really hard for me. It's really hard for me. This year has been really hard for me. And there are things that I would have done differently. And I wish I could say that in a way that said, how do we take that and move to the thing that we really want and love? There are things that I would have done differently. And for that, I'm sorry. There is a more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. It lives in us like a song. We dream about it all the time. The one that is on the horizon, the one that has been told to us. If only we would risk. If only we would embrace the world beyond my views and my values. A world that confirms that I am right. But if you are willing, I am also willing. And together we can move forward to a world that does not have to reflect us exactly, because we find joy in moving the gift of sharing what this community might mean together. For those of you who joined today, you're like, what the heck kind of sermon is this? Sometimes in the evangelical world, they line people up, they baptize them, and they preach them a fire and brimstone sermon, to really get them to be members. Fire and brimstone, it doesn't make sense in our world because we don't believe that you're going to hell anywhere. We don't believe in a God that would do that. And we don't believe in the suffering of the afterlife. We do believe that you suffer enough right now, right? And the solution to our suffering is not to conquer one another, to ensure that they see how right I am and how wrong they are. That's the spiritual and emotional equivalent of King Midas. because we've sealed ourselves off from the world, thinking that being right is like gold. The solution to suffering is generosity. There is no other solution. You can be right or you can be happy. I want to be happy. I want to be happy with you. I hope that you want to be happy with me. Amen.